It's so good to be here. It's been a while since I've done this in person and online, but we're going to roll with it today, all right? All right, so the type of person that I am, I require interaction. I know it's early, beloved, but I got up at 5, all right? But we're still going to interact and engage today, right? All right, let's go ahead and get started. Um, so I want to thank you all, Enlighten Ministry, for having me here today. And thank you all for joining us online as we talk about cultivating a lifestyle of self care. Beloved, too often in our society, we tend to relegate self care as an item on a checklist, right? And although self care does incorporate actions that may be checked off, cultivating a lifestyle requires that we move towards embracing rhythms of self care. This requires both a mind and a heart shift. So, today in this 2-part workshop, we're going to cover the following. Let's see if I can get tech to work with me. Look, it worked. Yay! I'm a little silly, right? So, we're gonna start off by talking about why self care matters. I'll share a little bit of my own personal journey. We'll talk about what is self care, and then we'll dive into some of the barriers to navigating self care. We'll pause and have a Q&A and then take a bit of a break. Then in our second session, we'll talk a little bit more about the importance of shifting our mindset, what scripture teaches us about self-care, and then move into preparing our hearts and embracing rhythms of self-care. So this is a workshop, and like I said, I'm the type of teacher and person who will ask for interaction in person, and yes, beloved, you online as well. Where's the camera so I know I can look directly at y'all folks online? Okay, right there. Yes, you too, right? So for those of you who love to take notes, I invite you to do so. But I also want to remind you that the slides will be put online afterwards for the resources for the workshop. So please don't feel like you have to write everything down, because I want to encourage us to be as present as possible. So if you're at home, I want you to remind people that you're uninterruptible during this time right now, right? Especially if you don't live alone. If you've got little ones with you, I want you to tell them that right now you're taking time for you and that you'll get back to them and check in with them when this workshop is over. I'm looking at the people online, right? And the first thing I want to say is good job to each and every one of you for taking the first step in cultivating a lifestyle of self-care by prioritizing yourself, showing up here today, and making the time to be here for you. And so while we are here, it's important that we are fully here and be as present as possible. And so before we jump into some of the content pieces, I want to take a moment to help us center ourselves. So, wherever you are, here in person or at home, get comfortable. So you can set your notes down to the side, nothing in your hands, get comfortable. And I'm going to walk us through a centering exercise. So I want you to begin by bringing your attention to your environment. Slowly looking around and noticing that you are safe in this moment. Now bring your attention into your body. You can close your eyes if that's comfortable for you, or you can maintain a soft gaze with your eyes partially opened, but not focusing on anything in particular. Notice your body seated wherever you are. Feel the support of the pew a chair, the floor, the couch beneath you. And take a few deep, long breaths in a way that's comfortable for you. And as you take a deep breath, bring in more oxygen, enlivening your body. And as you exhale, you might sense a bit more of relaxing. Notice your feet on the floor. Notice the sensations, the weight and pressure, the vibration or heat. Now notice your legs against the back of the pew or the chair. Is there pressure? Is there pulsing? Is there heaviness or lightness? Notice your back against your seat and how it's supporting you. If you're not able to notice sensations in all areas of your body, that's okay. We are more connected to certain areas of our body than others at different times of the day. Now I want you to bring your attention into your stomach area. If your stomach is tense or tight, can you allow it to soften? Take a breath. Notice your hands. Are your hands tense or tight? See if you can allow them to soften. Notice your arms. Feel any sensation in your arms. Do your best to allow your shoulders to be soft. Notice your neck and your throat, and try to allow them to be soft. See if you can invite them into a sense of relaxation. Try to soften your jaw. Do your best to allow your face and facial muscles to be soft. Then notice your whole body as best you can. Take a breath. Slowly open your eyes without focusing on anything in particular. Allow the head and neck to gently roll, taking in the space you are in. And when you feel ready, you can return to your normal gaze. I want to begin with our first reflection question of why are you here and what are you hoping for today? So if you're in person, go ahead and ask that question. Just raise your hand or I'll point to you. And then if you're online, go ahead and type it in the Slido. I think I can see it here. We'll figure that out and go from there. So why are you here? You guys are grown. You can just shout it out and respect space of other people. Keep it short. Just tell on it. Don't tell long. But just say, why are you here? Thank you for putting that up there. Thank you for recognizing that my eyes are tired and older than they used to be and making that bigger. I appreciate the media guys back there. Thank you. So why are you here? Beloved, don't make me call you out, because I will. Being in community. Thank you, Tim. Tom? Thanks, Tom. Uh-huh. How to care for yourself mentally, spiritually, and physically. Online, I see to learn better how to care for myself in the way that honors God. To learn, what else? What else? A couple more. Go ahead. It's a good life skill to have. Especially when the world has so much pressure. We live in a world that's like this, go, 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 produce, do more, 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 constantly. Yeah, yeah. To get some insight and skills to hopefully pass on to other people too, get guidance on self care. My eyes were adjusting to the smaller print. So thank you all for saying that, because it's important to kind of know while you are here, so that even as we go along throughout the workshop, I want to make sure we're hitting on the reasons why you're here. You get a descriptor, you sign up, but everybody signs up for different reasons. So it's good to know who's here and also have an understanding of what brought us each here. So can I do this one again? Cool. Thank you. So the reason that I am here um, is because I've been on a journey back to myself, and that has meant for me a revolutionary act of loving myself and caring for myself well. And it has been a journey for me, one that I think began nearly 7 years ago, and one that I continue to be on today. Excuse me. It's important to know and understand that my approach comes from a place of being, hold on, I think I have something caught in my throat. I'm gonna just take a sip of water. Thank you. Okay, cool. That's better. That sound better? I'm good. We good. All right, let's keep going. And so for me, what that means to be a co-journeyer is that I'm on this journey. I've been growing and learning over the years, and I bring my lived experience coupled with what I've researched and learned to share with you all, which is why I want to begin with sharing a bit of my story. So, as a woman and as a partner, a mother, an employee, I had this idea that I had to make and keep everything just right, that I had to maintain everything in this pristine, perfect, polished way. Anybody else ever had that expectation? That it was my job and my duty of sorts. And then as a Christian and as a pastor, I believe that I had to have this type of holy suffering, right? That requires sacrificing and giving of myself till I had nothing left to give. I believe that the work and ministry was so important, so I sacrificed sleep, balanced eating, having fun with friends, all for the sake of the kingdom. And the work, because the work that I was doing I was deeply passionate about and knew that I was called to do. As a Black woman in America, I knew that I had to work twice or 3 times as hard, because there's no space to let up or let anyone catch me slipping. I believed I had to be strong, which meant I had no space to be weak or vulnerable, to be human with all my emotions and fragility. And as a person who's a high functioning, depressed person, it made it difficult for me and others around me to see what was really going on. Recently, I watched the Red Table Talk, and April, Miss USA Chelsea Chris's mom, spoke out. And in the conversation, one of the things that she said, she shared, and I'll share a quote. She said, "Depression is not always marked by someone laying in the bed or unable to do things. There are people who are high functioning, who can get through the day because they know how to wear the face." And we've all been taught how to wear the face. That's the end of her quote. In the show, she shared how her daughter, April, who ended up committing suicide, didn't feel like she could share the weight of that pain, her loneliness with folks, because she didn't want to burden anyone with that pain. And then on the show, they had a psychologist on there who reminded us that high functioning depression is a descriptor that we use to help us better understand people who are dealing with depression, but who don't present as if they're dealing with depression. These folks go to work or school. They can engage in conversations with family, friends, and loved ones. They do all the things that everyone else can do, but behind closed doors, they are really dealing with what it means to have a depressive illness. And so for me, that was one of the things that made it difficult as well. It meant that I had no space or time to simply be, but rather to put on a face and push through. I found myself working 60 hours a week. I know someone has a question about doing that or more, attempting to complete a doctorate degree, working 2 jobs, raising a family, trying to be all things to all people, right? And then the department I was working for made a decision to downsize staff, but they didn't downsize the workload. That happens, right? So I did my good soldier duty and absorbed the work from my previous coworkers into my workload without any additional compensation. We'll never do that again. So working 3 times as hard, seeking to prove my worth. I wanted to prove that I could and that I deserved to be there and could handle whatever was brought my way. So I did the same work with less resources, exceeding expectations, and I was rewarded with less resources, human and otherwise, and additional work because I proved I was capable and resourceful. At home, I did not give in, even though I didn't give in completely to all the mommy wars. And if you're a parent, you understand the mommy wars. And that whole pace of keeping up with all the moms and the holiday parties and the extracurricular activities. So even though I didn't give completely in, it took its toll as I found myself trying to navigate and manage all of the extras and the frills that required to just raise school-age kids. And I could feel myself losing myself, but wasn't quite sure what to do. I was, after all, doing the good work for the sake of God. Suffering was supposed to be a part of it. We were taught that was what it meant to bear our cross. And then one day I found myself looking out the window across the street at our neighbor's house. They had begun to do some renovation and they were adding on one room, but discovered that the foundation and the entire structure needed to be revamped. And as I kept watching what was supposed to be this small, quick renovation project turn into this massive undertaking, I began to realize that I had constructed a house, a life that had not considered me. And it was literally killing me. Months later, I found myself at a retreat for women of color, and I went to a session on self-care. I attended because I wanted, honestly, to meet the presenter, Dr. Shaniqua Walker-Barnes. She had written this book, Too Heavy a Yoke, Black Women and the Burden of Strength, that I had been slowly working, and by working, I mean crying my way through as I was reading it. And although I was there to learn about self-care, I wanted to meet her because I was shifting my doctoral study focus. But the book had helped me to begin to name the fact that in order to survive as a Black woman, I had embraced this whole idea of the strong Black woman armor, which often teaches us to have an extreme independence, caregiving, and emotional self-regulation, which had begun to negatively impact my overall well-being. I was in survival mode. I'm glad I went because the workshop began to cast a light on many things in my life that were out of balance. In that workshop, we took this quick assessment to determine our fatigue as caregivers in the caring and justice profession. And as I looked down at the numbers, it confirmed what my body, mind, and soul already knew. I was burnt out and operating on empty. But the idea of self-care, it all seemed both like something I did not deserve. It was something that I felt like I didn't have time or the luxury or the privilege for. Near the end of the session, she asked us one question. What's one thing you can do to care for yourself today? Even if all you can do is drink water today. I walked away from that session thinking, okay, I can do this. I can drink water every day to care for myself. And that was such a critical question. What can you do to care for yourself, myself today? What that workshop helped me to do was to begin to shift my mindset, my heart, and paradigm around understanding self-care, that self-care was something we did daily. Me choosing to drink water each day was a choice to daily seek to care for me. It was an acknowledgement that I deserve to be cared for. That self-care was not a luxury for the powerful and privileged, but a necessity for all people. Beloved, self-care is a revolutionary act of love that is very countercultural. For many of you, you may relate to different aspects of my story. As many of us, we've lived in this rat race cycle where we wake up for breakfast, get ourselves and maybe children ready. If we need to go to work or school, then drive or move to a location in our home to go to work. Clock in, maybe take a break for lunch, maybe do a working lunch because we have so much work to do, or maybe use our lunch to run errands during that break. We continue to work, make it home exhausted, maybe eat dinner, maybe even if we are lucky, go to the gym, turn on the TV or social media, zone out or consume it, go to bed, and then we wake up and do it all over again. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Okay. Thank you for, appreciate you. Feedback loop. And then when we get to the weekend, we feel like this. We feel like the dog, like, thank you, it's Friday, or the cat just want to color up and don't move. And then we may find ourselves overindulging or binging or watching or consuming through shopping and whatnot. Maybe we'll have a little bit of fun with our friends and get some errands done, the cleaning and all the things that didn't get done on our second shift at home. But sometimes we just hope to be able to be like that cat and do nothing at all. But often, by the time the next Monday rolls around, we don't find ourselves feeling any more rested or refreshed to start again. Instead, we feel like it's Monday, right? And it's not that. It's not that those things can't be a part of our self-care plan and rhythms. It's just that by the time we create space to do them on the weekends or on our days off, we are already so depleted that whatever we put back in doesn't bring us back to full. It might bring us to a quarter of tank. So it doesn't sustain us the way it needs to. Now, we've tossed around this word self-care, but it's important to actually talk about what it is. So let's talk about that. If you Google it, you'll come across a lot of different things. The Global Self-Care Federation defines it as the practice of individuals looking after their own health, using the knowledge and information available to them. It is a decision-making process that empowers individuals to look after their own health efficiently and conveniently in collaboration with health and social care professionals as needed. This points out the importance of it starting with us thinking and knowing so we can make a decision. It helps us to see the importance of agency of the person and the need to be empowered to respond and act based on what we learn and know. The Oxford Dictionary says that it's the practice of taking action to preserve or improve on our own health. Or it's the practice of taking an active role in protecting one's own well-being and happiness, and particularly during periods of stress. There's a protection of self. With this definition, it teaches us that self-care requires action and an active role on our part, And the goal is to preserve our health, to protect our health and our well being. And although it talks about doing this particularly during periods of stress, which is important, it's equally important to cultivate rhythms even when we aren't stressed. According to one group of psychologists in their article, they say self-care, they say that it's a multidimensional, multifaceted process of purposeful engagement in strategies that promote healthy, functioning, and enhance well-being. In that article, it reminds us that it's multidimensional and multifaceted because it includes various aspects of our life, both personally and professionally. Self-care is not isolated to what you do at home. It's purposeful because it requires an intentionality in how we choose to behave and engage. They note that the goal of self-care is not only to maintain resilience in the face of stress, but also to flourish in personal and professional life. For so many of us, we live in a survival modality, right? Which actually prevents us from thriving and flourishing. What self-care helps us to do is to change our modality so that we can center human flourishing by focusing on our overall well-being. And when I think about well-being, I like to think about it in different ways, which the lady over there talked about earlier too, right? It's physical, it's mental, it's emotional, it's spiritual, it's relational. The last definition of self-care that I think is helpful comes from the World Health Organization. And they say that self-care is the ability of individuals, families, and communities to promote health, prevent disease, maintain health, and cope with illnesses and disabilities with or without the support of a health worker. This last definition provided by WHO reminds us of a very important aspect of self-care. You said it earlier, it's communal, right? Yes, there is an individual component to it, but there are ways in which we need to include our family, our loved ones, our community. Since it requires shifting our paradigm, it is important for it to not just be about one person, but the community has to shift as well. So if we think about all those different things, what is self-care? And how do we move into it? Well, it begins with an informed decision, right? We've got to make a decision. And it includes purposeful, intentional actions. It incorporates various areas of our life, both personally and professionally. And it attends to our overall well-being. That's physical, mental, emotional, relational, and spiritual. It requires individual agency. That is a guide that needs to be guided and supported by the community as a whole. So now that we have like a basic understanding of what self-care is, I want to talk a little bit about why it matters. Maybe the slide. Oh, there we go. Cool. So self-care is an important tool for our mental health, right? And so I want to throw out some statistics to you all. So according to the State of Mental Health from the Mental Health America findings released in 2022, they found that in 2019, just prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, about 20% of adults experienced a mental illness. That's equivalent to about 50 million Americans. They found that suicidal ideation continues to increase among adults in the US, and it's about 4.5%. They also found that a growing percentage of youth in the US live with major depression. About 15% of youth experience this. And then it said about 2.5 million youth in the US have severe depression. And then multiracial youth, it's even greater, right? And then one of the other things that was interesting from this finding is that the rates of substance use are increasing for youth and adults, even prior to COVID, when folks just that increased. So it matters because it's self-care matters because it's a tool to help manage and help us navigate our mental health. It'll work. I'm gonna just press it. See? There we go. It also matters because it helps us to navigate stress. When we are stressed and don't care for ourselves, it impacts our overall well-being. We've talked about that a little bit. So when stress is not managed, it impacts every system of your body, right? And according to Mayo Clinic, when you're stressed, you can have headaches, muscle tension in your body, chest pain, fatigue, change in your sex drive, digestive problems. All those things can happen. It affects your mood, anxiety, restlessness, lack of motivation or focus, feelings of being overwhelmed, being irritable or anger, sadness or depression. It impacts our behavior, our over or under eating. It could have lead to angry outbursts, the misuse of substances, social withdrawal, overconsumption, and other unhealthy behaviors. Stress impacts our quality of life. In addition to self-care being able to help you with our navigate mental health, it can also help us to reduce stress. So here's my question. If we know that self-care is important to reducing stress, important to managing our mental illness, if we know all of this and we know we want to flourish, why isn't it a normal part of our rhythms and practices? So here's a time for you guys to talk back to me. So, what are some of the barriers that you can think of that prevent us from actually cultivating a lifestyle of self-care? Talk back to me. Time. Too busy. Time, too busy. Permission, bad habit. You said lazy, overworking, busy business. What else? Being prideful, thinking you're okay. What else? Valuing others more than yourself. That's a big one. Yeah. Lack of knowledge, family chores, and choices. I misread it, but chores. Yeah. Guilt, lack of knowledge, don't want to spend money, right? Time not feeling worthy of giving myself permission to take care of myself. Societal expectations, accident, societal expectations, yeah. I'm gonna let those roll in a little bit more. Don't know what self-care means, right? What else here? What else do y'all have here? What are some of your barriers to self-care? Any more? Yeah, we feel like we have to be intentional and disciplined. Somebody else said guilt. I heard that over here too. Fear of failures, so I keep working harder, right? Those societal expectations of what we're supposed to be doing with our time, right? Uncertain where to start, feel like it's work to start, right? Like, who needs more work? Yeah, I'm going to give y'all homework too, so sorry. Self-esteem. Y'all was supposed to laugh at that. Come on, y'all. Wake up. It's after 9. Self-esteem. Yep. Any other things? Any other barriers? You named some really good ones. Really good ones. Okay. I'm going to switch back over to the slide because I don't see any more over there. Thank you. See, we working together. You got to always work together with the sound engineers because they be back there doing a whole lot. So I appreciate you guys. So, yeah, some of these things, a lot of the things you guys have already mentioned. Time, resources, our jobs and other responsibilities and obligations to others, guilt, right? And I believe the number one barrier to self-care is our perception, right? Our perception about self-care. We've labeled self-care as selfishness, self-absorbed, self-centered. I guess it doesn't help that the word self is in there, right? Kind of leans us into that. So much of how we function as a society revolves around the commodification of human labor, right? You do, and that is how you find your worth. So much of what we do often creates these systems and structures that doesn't consider the human well-being within those structures and how we do life. We tend to learn this idea when we're young. Like when we're in school, for example. Kids are rewarded for perfect attendance. Whoever got a perfect attendance award when in grammar school, elementary, right? I was proud of my perfect attendance award, but it said that I needed to show up, be present every single day, no matter how I might feel, no matter if the people were messing with me and not talking to me on the playground. I needed to still show up. I needed to still show up. Even if I barely had any food to eat that morning, I still needed to show up and be present and engaged. I needed to show up at school every single day, right? And so much in our school systems and districts are also rewarded, right, by this whole idea of attendance. According to edsource.org, which works to engage Californians on key educational challenges, it reminds us that historically, California has funded its schools based on the average daily attendance. So it's one of 6 states that still follows this rule, right? And so although it's seeking to shift its model, it hasn't done so yet. And so what that means is that in California, schools have been penalized when students don't show up, right? They don't get funding based on enrollment and need, but by people and pupils being present. And I'm not saying children shouldn't be present every day, but I'm saying when we set that expectation up early on that you have to show up, you have to be present every single day and do X, Y, and Z, it kind of sets us up in this model, this rat race that we then transfer into our workplace later on. The second part of this perception isn't just about self-care, but it's about how we perceive, our perception about ourselves, our perception about our own value, and our perception about our worth. We buy into this whole notion that we are what we do, right? We believe that we're only as good as what we do. We don't feel like we matter, and we have to prove that we're good enough to be present and to be cared for. We don't think that our needs and our desires are as important as others. That was something someone wrote up there earlier. And we live with this sacrificial mentality where we are constantly placing ourselves on an altar. And unfortunately, sometimes we get rewarded for doing so. We get rewarded for how committed we are as volunteers. We get rewarded for all the things we do. We don't really get rewards for people who take the most naps. Anybody ever got one of those? Right? We don't get rewards for those things, but those things actually help us and like sustain our life, right? And maybe if you're at work and you don't use your days off, some people don't use any of their paid time off because they know it'll get paid out at the end of the year. And that feels more beneficial than taking time off because they know they might need that additional funds in order to either make a living wage or because it's just more beneficial to what they need than taking time off. You get rewarded if you work overtime, and on holidays, you get overtime and holiday pay, right? Which you should, but it rewards this labor of constant working. And maybe you just don't feel like you're enough. And so you constantly push to prove that you belong. And maybe you've learned to value yourself by how other people value you. And you haven't quite learned that you are worthy to be the center of the story of your life. Beloved, you are worthy to be the center of the story of your life. When our perception about ourselves, our value, our worth, and what self-care is becomes distorted, our mind won't let us create space for self-care without feeling guilty about it, right? And when we have that cognitive dissonance, that incongruency, that guilt, or sometimes shame, it will override us from one of the first things we learned about self-care, making informed decisions and taking actions to care for ourselves and create space for others to care for them. This is why we need to expand our definitions around and understanding around self-care, to move beyond it being about simply these activities that we pay for and check off, and began to embrace it as a life-sustaining rhythm. Say that with me. Self-care is a life-sustaining rhythm. Yes. Then we can begin to see that it is not selfish. It is how we live, right? Self-care helps us stay alive. And even though we've talked about the concept of self-care, I sometimes wonder if we start to think about it as human care, if it would allow us to just destigmatize that whole way we've labeled it as selfish. And then when we say human, it'll remind us that it requires a communal action and not just for one individual. Beloved, when we embrace a holistic understanding of self-care or human care, it can then become a natural part of our everyday lives, because then we no longer have that mindset, but we can begin to give ourselves permission to care for ourselves every day. At this time, we're going to go ahead and pause for Q&A. Then we'll break and then return and talk a little bit more about shifting our mindsets and begin thinking through these practical things we can do. Yep, cool. I can have a seat. I still need this, right? Yay, Tracey.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Tracey, for sharing with us and encouraging us in this manner. So we do have our Q&A time, so you can use Slido to do that. You can send questions to us. We have opportunities here for you to get some answers that maybe personally will help you. So I'm just going to begin with the first one is, how do I have self-care when I am so busy, just for speaking about it, when I'm so busy, my work requires me to work 60-hour weeks. It has been bad since I work from home, since COVID started.
Yeah, that's a really good question. How can you begin to have self-care when you have so much stuff going on in your life? Like I said, part of my journey was I started recognizing and saying, I was working 60 hours a week, 2 jobs in school and all that stuff. And the first thing that you have to do is simply give yourself permission to have self-care, right? I think part of the reason that self-care is so hard is because we've made it seem like you have to have like a whole retreat like once a week or once a year or whatever, like an entire all of that. And so it seems inaccessible. But, beloved, self care is the simple things that we can do every day. So, I want to encourage you if you're working 60 hours a week and you have so many things going on, start by doing the centering exercise that we did today at the very beginning. Start simple, keep it simple. Think of one thing. It only starts with one thing, right? As we develop habits, then we can add more pieces. But start with one thing that you think will be beneficial to help your life flourish, and then see what else you can add. And in the next section, we're going to talk more specifically about some specific things you can do, as well as what that means for incorporating your community into it as well.
So we can start by making sure we drink water.
Drink water.
Yeah.
Y'all see this water bottle? I carry it with me everywhere, and I fill it up like 2 to 3 times a day. Like, that is my go-to.
And what would you say would be the second thing you do after you drink water?
The second thing that I do after I drink water is I eat 3 meals a day. 3 meals a day, right? And my third one is I have a bedtime routine. Yep. Just like my kids have bedtime routines, I have a bedtime routine. My bedtime routine is I brush my teeth, I wash my face, I put on my pajamas, I say goodnight to my children, I get in my bed, I grab my journal or a book, I turn off the tech and the phone, and I put my phone far away from me, and I read a little bit or I journal a little bit, and I have dim lights, right? And then I go to sleep. And I start that bedtime routine at like 9:30. Like, it works for kids, it works for us too, y'all.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
How do we teach our children to have self-care?
The one thing that I think is super important that you teach your children about self-care is modeling, right? Your kids will see what you're doing and they'll model it, right? Like, they'll see, and we know, like, mommy's taking time for her mommy, right? And my son will come home from school and he's like, I'm not doing homework right now. I'm just having me time. Like, my kids know that they have permission to ask for me time. Yeah. So modeling by doing it yourself.
Good. Do you do anything to give exercises to your children to do self-care in any way?
Not necessarily exercises. I'll invite them into it. Part of it is because I've got a 14-year-old and 11-year-old, and so part of what I'll do is I'll ask them questions to help them begin to think about and shift their paradigm. So, for instance, like with my teen who is managing the stress of school and high school, like, I'll ask them questions that will help them to make informed decisions about what they need to do. Like the other day, they came to me and they said, hey, Mom, do you think I have time for a nap before I do this or that? Or do you think I should take a nap? And so I asked, like, check it with your body. What is your body telling you need right now? Like, what time does your next event start? Do you think you have at least 20 minutes? Because you need at least 20 minutes for a good, decent nap. If so, take a nap, right? Yeah.
Very good. Very good. One of the things that we're empty nesters now, but I remember when we were very busy, Karen and I tried to take turns where we would care for the children so the other could have some time alone for self-care. And just, I think parents can do some tag team, rest time for each other.
Yeah, parenting, co-parenting is important. And then for people who are single, like, bring your community in. It's okay to ask for help, to ask people to come and hang out with your kids, even if they're teenagers. I have friends who literally come pick up my kids and take them places. I am grateful for those people because they love me. And they know that my children, I love them, but their humanity sometimes stresses me out. And so having other people care for me as I care for my kids by taking them is super important.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The next one asks, how can I have self-care including boundaries when others are vying for my attention, especially those for whom I am their caregiver?
So that's a tricky question. So there's two things. One is I want everybody to say this word. N-O. No. Say it.
No.
No is a complete sentence. That's something I had to learn. No is a complete sentence that does not require an explanation. When my girlfriend told me that, it baffled me. I was like, but I have to say why. I have to explain. No is a complete sentence. So practice saying no daily. The other thing, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this in our second session, is you've got to teach people around you that you are not accessible 24/7. You are not God, right? And even when you are in a position of being someone's primary caregiver, whether it's infants or someone who needs you for their health and care, then that means you need to expand your network and community around you so that you are not going 24/7 to care for those people. People who are caring for folks, especially like older parents and folks who can't care for themselves, they need to have people on their team, right? Who will come and relieve them, who will come and step in and sit with whoever needs attention 24/7. And there are people, but what that means is we have to humble ourselves, get rid of the pride, and ask for help and invite people into that, right? So it's a teaching, but it's an inviting. And it's definitely learning how to say no. Because people are so used to you saying yes, so they come to you automatically. And when you say no, what you empower them to do is expand their community and network as well.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Just also want to remind the audience that if you do have questions, you can write them on paper and one of the ushers will pick them up. There's one over here and bring them up to me. There's some here. So the next question is, well, family, how do I talk to my spouse about their need for self-care when I'm worried about them, but I'm afraid they're going to react?
Um, that's a tricky question. And this is the thing that we know with partners in marriage, you can't ever make anyone do anything. You can only really start with you. So I think part of it is modeling it for yourself. But any ways that you have agency and control over your family rhythms, figure out how you can incorporate some of those family rhythms that create space for self-care as a family. So instead of centering them out individually, center it and make it something that the family can do as a whole. We're gonna go take a walk after dinner. I'm gonna go take a walk after dinner. Can you join me? We don't have to talk about anything. We're just gonna walk around the block. And encouraging them to come with you as part of your self-care journey, right? And then see how they begin to see and notice how it's in you, and see if they want to invite that there. So don't go in trying to lecture people and telling them you need self-care, but also I think it's important to just also express concern, right? And express your love and care for people, and ask, how can you help and be a support of them, because of some of the things they do.
Couple questions here
Mhm.
is, should I look at self-care as more for myself or more for others?
It's both, right? It's not either or. That's why that's why it's important for us to understand that self-care is communal, right? So we think about self-care and some of the things that we need in order to attend to our well-being, but then we also have to consider how do we make and create space for others to be cared for well.
This one's gonna just a little bit off topic, but still an important question.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, when I see sadness or depression in others, such as my daughters, what can I do to help them?
Mm. That's a good question, because it's hard, especially like as a parent, to see your children experiencing sadness. So, so I think one of the first things is just checking in with them as much as possible. So figuring out how to ask that question is a hard thing. So asking more open-ended questions, right? Not questions that are just yes and no. Asking more detailed questions like, who did you have lunch with today, right? Was there anything that you was interesting in class? In this particular class, can you tell me one thing you learned? This is one of the things I do with my children who, when I see them sad, I'll ask, tell me two things that was interesting in your day, just to get them starting to talk, right? When I see a particular child in my house, like just sad and angry, like sometimes I'll just go and sit and be present and ask, what do you need? Do you need mommy to just sit here with you? Do you need a hug? Do you need to be alone? Do you want to cry? Do you want to go on a walk? So part of me giving those suggestions is to help them to think about those things. But I also recognize there was this one situation in time when one of my kids was just really sad, and we just literally sat there for like 30 minutes, not saying anything but me being present. And I said, whenever you're ready, you can say or share what's going on. And eventually they started to kind of open up. But if you begin to do that more and more on a regular basis, they'll know that you're a safe space to hold it. The other thing I want to say for parents, let your children see you cry. We think we have to hold that and hide that, but if you start to let your children see you cry and you say, mommy is just really sad today and I'm having a rough day. The things that I know I needed to do to care for myself is I took a shower today. So I'm proud about that, but I'm having a hard time, right? Like they don't need to know all the nitty-gritty details about what is causing my sadness, but I'm modeling for them that it's okay to talk about sadness, which is something that as parents we think we kind of have to hide. Yeah.
Very good. Well, this will be our last question. It's a multi question on the same topic. So, but how do I avoid burnout? How do I detect early signs of burnout? How do I treat burnout when I'm so busy in all areas of my life?
You're probably in burnout because you're asking those questions. Like that's a good indication when you start asking the question, am I burnout? It's because your body is giving you indications that something is going on. Repeat the first part of that question.
How do I avoid burnout?
Yeah.
How do I detect it? How do I treat it?
Yeah. So how do you avoid it? Part of it is setting boundaries, but that requires that you know yourself and you know your limits. A lot of people can be high functioning and high capacity. Just because you have the capacity to work 60 hours a week doesn't necessarily mean that you should. And so learning what your capacity to do certain things in a way that still creates space for you to flourish. How do you know it? How do you detect it? And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of those things in the afternoon session as well. But I think the other piece is learning how to listen to your body. Do you guys listen to your body? Do you know how to listen to your body? Yeah. Part of the reason that I began with the body scan was because so often we just use our bodies to get us from point A to point B, but our bodies are often talking to us and telling us things, right? When you're noticing that you're having persistent pain, like taking time to just do a quick body scan will help you to kind of see where your body is holding stress and will give you some indication that something might need to shift. And so then you have to start to say, what's our word for the day?
No.
Yes, say it again.
No.
Say it again.
No.
Because it's such a hard word for people to say. Not 2-year-olds, but for grown-ups, it's such a hard word to say. So learn how to say no every day. That is literally what I tell my kids. I'm going to say no to you at least once a day.
Excellent. So water, food, and no. We got it. Okay, so we're going to take a break. It's 10:07, so we're going to take a 10-minute break, and we'll see you back here around 10:17. And for those at home, thanks so much for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you back here as well in 10 minutes.